Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. I hope you'll be able to hear me clearly. Hope so. We'll begin with chapter 26, verse 3. Chapter 26, verse 3, this is the section of Bikurim, when a person brings their first fruits to Yerushalayim. And it's really fascinating because the Torah prescribes exactly what the person is supposed to say. When you think about it, there's not that many things that the Torah tells us what to say to God. I mean, davening, siddur, Shema is psukim from the Torah. Basically, besides that, the rabbis decided what would make sense. Benching, we talk about benching being from the Torah. It's a pasuk that says you should bench, and the rabbis figured out how to structure it in some ways based on the pasuk. Here, the Torah tells us literally exactly the psukim, the verses that a person is supposed to recite when he brings the first fruits to the Beis HaMikdash. And in verse 3, you should come to the Kohen who will be in those days. You should say to the Kohen, I have declared today to Hashem your God, that I have come to the land. Here it is. I've come to the land that God swore to our patriarchs to give to us. Bikurim is specifically a mitzvah, first fruits of the land of Israel. If you grow fruits or grain or whatever it is in Silver Spring, Maryland, you don't bring bikurim. There are other halachos, but not bikurim. But the very opening of the pasuk is strange. Come to the Kohen who is in those days. Who else am I supposed to go to? And there's a basket that I'm supposed to bring to the Kohen who's on duty at the Beis HaMikdash. It's like saying when you have to bring something to the post office, lahavdo, come to the post office and give it to the man who's there today. Well, it's going to be hard to give it to the man who was there yesterday because it's today. So why does it talk about today? Or that will be in those days. So let's start with the Ramban. Ramban on Pasuk Gimel. The Kohen who will be there in those days. The Ramban just says a very interesting pshat. The Ramban says, there are certain mitzvos that I can give to a Kohen, whichever Kohen I want. When I have truma, so I'm supposed to give a certain amount of my produce to a Kohen, I can choose the Kohen. Then there are other mitzvos that, you come to the Beis HaMikdash and part of your sacrifice is to be eaten by a Kohen. Whichever Kohen families are on call, they're the ones who can do it. So the Ramban says the Torah is clarifying that this mitzvah of Bikurim, even though you're going to be giving him this basket of fruit, you don't get to choose your Kohen. Whoever is on rotation that day, you don't get to designate a Kohen who'll come with you or something like that. So it's a very technical point the Ramban is saying. But then he brings down Rashi, who's a very frequently quoted Rashi, and he makes a whole different point. Rashi Zal Kosav, Ein Lecha, Ela Kohen Shia Biyamecha, Kamo Shehu. Rashi says it's a philosophical statement, not a technical statement. You have to settle for the Kohen of your time. Sometimes a person will be in a situation where they remember they went with their grandparents to bring Bikurim, and the Kohen who was there when their grandparents went, that was a real Kohen. This person, times have changed. It's a different generation. So the point is, Rashi says, you bring it to the Kohen in your days. Don't go looking for the Kohen for the past generation. It's a nice idea. It's an important idea. It obviously is true for a lot of things in life. Lo avinosizeh. Ramban says, I don't understand this. There's a very similar pasuk when it talks about bringing a question in the Torah. It talks about bringing a question to a judge. It says, bring the question to the judge that will be in those days. What does it mean that will be in those days? The message is, you'll go to a judge. The judge might not be as great a scholar as the people from an earlier time. The judge might not be as pious as the people from an earlier time. But if he's appropriate for your generation, if he, relative to the other possible candidates, if he's right, if he's good, then you've got to listen to him. You can't invalidate him because he's not important enough. Like the famous Gemara, Yiftach B'doro K'Shmuel B'doro, that, Yiftach was not considered such an illustrious leader, but Yiftach for his generation needs to be treated like the great prophet Shmuel in his generation. The Ramban says, I get the point when you're talking about a judge, when you need a person of a certain level of scholarship or a certain level of piety. I mean, I'm just bringing a basket of fruit to the base of Mikdash. I'm not asking a halachic question of the Kohen. So why would I think that I should complain about the Kohen? He's just a Kohen. What's the big deal? So the Ramban brings down Kain Re'isi B'Sifri, Uvaso ala Kohen Sheyeh B'Yamim Oheim. The Ramban says, but I see also in Sifri it's a similar thing. It says, come to the Kohen that will be in those days. Zui Sheb Yosek Li Omer, V'chidala Atenu Kohen She'eno B'Yomecha. Yosek Li says, what I thought I should bring it to a Kohen who's not in those days. Same questions we've been dealing with. Ela Kohen Shu Kasher Muchsak Lak B'Yosan Yamim Hayakarov V'Nisrachek Kasher. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili makes a point. He says, a Kohen who in your understanding is kosher. And this is, I don't want to read through all the detail here, but this is a very interesting technical point, which unfortunately is the type of thing that people grapple with in different aspects of life. Imagine the following situation. Let's say you bring Bikurim to the Kohen, and all fine and well, and he does it and everything. And then 3 weeks later, you're sitting at Shul, and those are, sometime around the third or fourth aliyah or during the rabbi's speech. That's when you find out interesting stuff from your neighbor. So your neighbor leans over to you and says, by the way, did you hear about the Kohen who was just revealed to be an invalid Kohen? You say, really? Which Kohen was it? And he tells you, and it's the Kohen who did your Bikurim. So the Torah tells me to bring Bikurim to a Kohen. Let's say I showed up at the base of Mikdash and no Kohen is available. Let's say they're all busy. So can I just grab somebody and say, you'll be the guy. I'm deputizing you as a Kohen. That doesn't work. That's not the mitzvah. So what happens if I bring the Bikurim to a Kohen, and at the time that he did the avoda, he had a chezkas kashrus, he had status as being valid, but then later on he lost that status. It became not some strange ruler. Beis checked it out. It became clear he's not a valid Kohen. So the Ramban brings down the medrash that that's what the Torah is teaching me, that as long as the Kohen is a Kohen in those days, meaning if at that time he's understood to be a Kohen, I don't have to turn back the clock later. It's an interesting drasha to learn. But I'd like to share with you now the Sforno also. So the Sforno has a different pshat, also a very interesting pshat. So we only saw part of the formula that's declared when the person brings the Bikurim, but he starts off saying, I've told Hashem your God. That's a very humbling thing to say. I mean, what that really seems to imply is you relate to God in a totally different way than I relate to God. Like I can only hope to connect to God in the way that you, the Kohen, relate to God. So that's all fine and well if you're giving it like to Aaron a Kohen or something like that, or just the person you have a lot of respect for. Let's say you show up and you know this guy, he cuts you off in the street all the time. Are you kidding? This guy's no great shakes. He's just a Kohen. He's just born into it. Sforno says the Torah is telling me it's not as much about him, it's about his position. So I speak to him in the exact same way that I would speak to a very distinguished Kohen. So also an interesting pshat. So Rashi said the idea is don't bemoan the fact that he's not a great Kohen. The Sforno explains that I might think that what I say to him, the respect I showed him in my words, Hashem, your God, maybe I would change that if he's not such a great Kohen. And the Sforno says the point is we don't change that. And then the Ramban also brought down two other ideas. One idea is I can't select my Kohen. And the other idea is if a Kohen became invalid down the road, that's still okay. All right. Now, let's actually go to verse 5. And now we continue with the formula that the person is saying. This might sound familiar. We take various psukim from this section and we recite them at the Seder. Because, and we'll touch on this in a moment, one of the most impactful things that the person says when he brings the Bikurim is he recognizes, God, you took us out of Egypt, and now you brought us into the land of Israel. So it's certainly very appropriate to convey some of these messages at the Seder. Verse 5, you should state before Hashem your God, Arami Oved Avi. This is normally understood as being a reference to Lavan, that Lavan, from the man from Aram, tried to destroy my father Yaakov. Vayered Mitzrayma. Yaakov ultimately went down to Egypt. Vayagar Shambam Seimaat. He lived in Egypt with a small group, a small family. Vayisham the Goy Gadol Atzum Varav. And of course, as we know the story, Yaakov became a great family, a great nation in Egypt. Verse 6. Vayareu Osoru HaMitzrim Vayanunu. The Egyptians treated us poorly and afflicted us. Vayitnu Aleinu Avodah Kasha. And they placed upon us hard labor. And we're not going to read all the psukim now, but we davened to Hashem. Hashem saw our plight. Hashem took us out of Egypt. And now, verse 9, and now Hashem has brought us to this place. And He has brought us this land flowing. He gave us this land flowing with milk and honey. Verse 10, and now I brought the first of my fruits, which you gave me, God. It's really an amazing, amazing set of psukim, because what we're doing is the person is looking at his bracha, at his blessing in his personal life, and he's connecting it all the way back to the Exodus from Egypt. He's seeing himself as part of a national story, which I think is amazing to think about. I just want to share with you one sforno. There's so many things we could touch on in these psukim, but sforno on pasuk vav, vayanunu vayitnu aleinu avodah kasha. They afflicted us and they placed upon us hard labor. Va'achar shahaya legoy lahaya roi lekabel matana shayatachas avdos umasha kana eved kana rabo. So the sforno says, if God would have wanted to give us a gift in Egypt, He couldn't have, in a sense. Why not? Because we were slaves. We were slaves to the Egyptians. And the rule is that when you give a gift to a slave, the gift automatically becomes the master's. So this is a whole different level in what the sforno is saying, and what the sforno is giving us a whole different level in what the pasuk is saying. God, we were slaves in Egypt. We couldn't have even accepted gifts from you because we were slaves of another nation. And then you took us out of Egypt and you brought us to Israel. And now it comes in a whole different way. Verse 9, you brought us to this place and you gave us this land. We're not slaves anymore, so now you can give us the gift of the land of Israel. And now I'm bringing the first of the fruits of the land that you gave to me. I thought that was just an interesting thing to think about. Okay, let's go on to, well, actually, let's stop here. It's 9:45. So we discussed the question of what it means that God, the Kohen in your days, and we also discussed this sforno about the difference between being a slave and being able to receive gifts.